As we're reading God's Word chapter by chapter, in yesterday's devotional, there was relentless opposition to the rebuilding of the temple of God. Because of the enemy's opposition, the work on the temple stopped. It came to a standstill. The enemy, however, does not have the last word, but God does. Welcome to the Word for 2022. Today we're in Ezra chapter 5. This was a very difficult, frustrating, discouraging time for God's people. It seemed as though that the enemy had won, that all was lost. But God is on the throne, and He was still speaking and moving. In verse 1, we read that He spoke through the prophet Haggai and the prophet Zechariah to the people. And then Zerubbabel and Yeshua set out once again to start rebuilding the temple of God. Now, when the enemy heard about it, they came immediately to try and stop the work once more. They said, "Who authorized you to start this rebuilding? And what are your names?" They wanted to intimidate the workers. In chapter 4, King Artaxerxes had given a decree to stop the work because of accusations that were leveled against the people of God. But now there was a new king, King Darius, and he had to make a ruling. We read in verse 5 that the eye of God was watching over the elders of the Jews, and they were not stopped until a report could go to Darius for his written reply. So, a letter was written to King Darius presenting their case for the rebuilding of the house of God there in Jerusalem. As they wrote this letter, in verse 13 they said, "In the first year of Cyrus, king of Babylon, King Cyrus issued a decree to rebuild this house of God." And then they said in verse 17, "Now, if it pleases the king, let a search be made in the royal archives of Babylon to see if King Cyrus did in fact issue a decree to rebuild this house of God in Jerusalem." In chapter 6, Darius, he did confirm the facts, and he issued a decree that the building should continue. It is so important that we know our history and that we never stop fighting for what is right. In chapter 4, the enemy tried to rewrite history. They tried to focus upon accusations and fear. They used slander, and they said whatever they could so that their agenda might go forward. The tactics of the enemy, they are still the same today. The enemy is trying to rewrite history. The enemy is trying to blur the lines between what is right and what is wrong. The enemy is promoting ungodly ideas and lifestyles. The enemy of our souls is promoting an agenda that goes against a godly society and biblical values. Just like the Israelites here in Ezra chapter 5, we must continually do the exact same thing. First, know our history and teach our history so that it is not forgotten. We need to teach God's word so that we might obey all that God has said. We might know what the truth is. Don't water it down, but always tell the truth. We need to trust in God's power and trust in the sovereignty of God every single day. Thank you so much for joining the Word for 2022.